Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction, which was quite complete, and also for inviting me to present to this campfire. So I'm going to speak about discrete and continuous cascade models, especially with a focus on turbulence. First, I was curious about the audience of the word multifractal in the academic community. So I typed, I searched for multifractal through the web of science, and just to see how many papers we have with the multifractal in the title. And we can see that we have, the word was first introduced in 1985. And then we have a regular increase since then, and we have more than 200 papers with multifractal in the title in the recent years, and a total of more than 4,000. So I'm going to speak first to give historical remarks, and then mention two types of multifractal fields and how to analyze them, and then give some examples from the field of turbulence. So the energy cascade was first proposed by Richardson in 100 years ago, and it was followed by proposal by Kolmogorov and Obukhov, where they found, they proposed some slopes of some spectral slope of, with a slope of 5/3. This was verified in many different situations since the 60s. But before this, Batchelor and Townsend have done some studies where they considered some increment of the velocity field. So they took the square of the increment, and what they found is that in fact you have some spikes, and they call this intermittency. And later, a bit later, in fact, in conferences in Marseille in '61, Obukhov and Kolmogorov have made some proposal, and so you can see in the paper of Obukhov a proposal of looking at local average of this quantity. So he said, okay, this quantity has pikes, but what we can do, we can assume that it's log normal, and what we can do is to look at the local average of this quantity. And Kolmogorov, in a accompanying paper, went in the same direction. So he said, okay, we can assume that it's log normal, and we take a local average. And furthermore, here I copied what he wrote. He said it's natural to suppose that the variance of log of epsilon is varying with the log of R, where R is the scale where you make average. So there was these two assumptions. And furthermore, in the Russian school, what was found also is experimentally, is the fact that if you consider the dissipation, okay, it's you have spikes, but these spikes have a spatial structure, and more precisely, they found Pauli fluctuations. So all this led Yaglom to propose this model, which is a model of a discrete multiplicative cascade. So it was the first multifractal model. Now, in fact, we call it multifractal, but not, of course, at that time it was not called multifractal because it was introduced later. And the motivation of Yaglom was to propose a model which would be compatible with all the properties that I mentioned, meaning intermittency at small scale, log normal properties, Pauli correlations. So if we look a little more closely at this model, so you have locally, vertically, you have a multiplication of random variables. You can show that it's scaling with the introduction of a moment function. And what you have also is you can show that the embedding structure of the cascade makes power law correlations. And we also can find for the generator, what I call here generator is the log of the process. You can find that it's log correlated, and also that its variance depends on the logarithm of the scale. So it was really precisely reproducing the assumption of Kolmogorov 62. That was all this was the motivation, in fact, why Yaglom proposed this model. And what is also interesting is to see, in fact, that this framework was proposed by the Russian school in the 60s for dissipation in turbulence. But in fact, it was very similar result have been obtained 10 years before in the field of geology. For example, Krieg in 51 found experimentally log normal statistic for ore deposition. Matron in 62 published a book where he discussed what he called regionalized variables, which correspond in fact to the local average, which was done by Obukov for the dissipation. And De Viers, so I'm not completely sure of the pronunciation, but I think De Viers, 51-53, proposed a multiplicative model which is quite similar with the one of Yaglom, and he also derived the fact that the generator has a variance which depends on the log of the process. So it was surprising to see all these similitudes. In turbulence, it's come from the Richardson cascade, the energy, and in geology, I don't exactly know. Of course, it can be linked to some fragmentation process, but the spatial structure, I don't know exactly where it comes from. So going back to discrete cascades, here I show a simulation using 2 to the 16 data point with a parameter mu, which is 0.2. It is normalized, and we see that we have locally pikes. The largest are close to 100. So in fact, this is generating localized diverging pikes, which are called singularities, and they have long branch correlations. There are different cascade models that have been proposed. After the one of Yaglom, we have a black and white beta model. You have the random beta model, the alpha model, and P model. This is for discrete cascade. So if I go back to the discrete cascade, you can see that from one structure to the next one, the scale is divided by 2. That's why we call this discrete cascade, because there is it's a discrete in scale. What can be done is to densify this cascade, but by having a scale ratio which is going to 1. And for this, you are led to infinitely divisible random variables. And for the cascade model, it's called log infinitely divisible cascade models. So this framework was proposed by Novikov in '94. And now it's recognized that continuous cascade model belong to log ID distributions. So there is an infinite number of possible log ID models. But some of the most well-known are log normal model, also log stable model, or log gamma, or log Poisson model. So globally, the framework, classical framework to study multifractal is, if we consider the dissipation, then we consider the scaling of the moments. We have a moment function. We also have singularities. We look at the probability of the singularities. We have the introduction of the codimension function, and the two functions are linked through a Legendre transform. The same can be done for the velocity field, where we are not coarse graining, but we are considering a structure function which correspond to increments of the field. And we have the classical notation in zeta of q for the moment function. And then we have also a codimension function. And here the Legendre transform was proposed originally by Parisi and Frisch in a paper in 1985, and it's also in the same paper that the word multifractal was first proposed. So now I discussed two, that's all for the historical remarks. I think it's useful in order to see what are the main reason why, in fact, these kind of models have been introduced, especially in the field of turbulence. And so I go to two different types of multifractal fields and how to analyze them. So if we have, first we have singular measures. So it's a field which has positive values with localized spikes. This is directly produced by a multiplicative process. The example is the dissipation in turbulence. And classically, what we do for this, we do a volume average, so it's what is called coarse graining, and we look at the moments and how the moments depend on the scale. And then we have stochastic process which have stationary increments. They are also called multi-affine or non-stationary multifractals. They are more or less a mixture of additive and multiplicative process. And in turbulence, the example is velocity of passive scalars. And for this, we look at the increments, or we look at other methods to suppress the local trend, like convolution with a kernel, with so-called wavelets, or other methods that exist for this. For the first type, one of the properties is that, in fact, the local average does not change the mean, so that the average of the quantity is constant. So it means that k of 1 is 0, and we have a typical shape of this function like shown here. And depending on the model that you choose, you have different analytical expression for this curve. And I give here the two curves that are found for two different models. For the non-stationary case, in fact, we have a new index, which is the index of non-stationarity, which is often called H. And here there are different definitions, but one possible definition is to say that it's zeta of 1. And in fact, the zeta of Q curve is the sum of a linear trend and a non-linear correction. And for the log normal model, the correction is quadratic. And for log stable model, the correction is a power law. And for the log Poisson model, the correction is an exponential. So now I go to examples in the field of turbulence and also in other fields, examples where I was mainly involved. So the first example I would like to mention is the dissipation in turbulence, but through a Lagrangian cascade. So in fact, it was direct numerical simulation, so what we call in turbulence DNS of Navier-Stokes equations, where we are following an element of fluid and we are estimating the dissipation along the trajectory. And the PDF is shown on the left in log scale, so that it's a first approximation is quadratic, but you see in the inset that the left hand part is not exactly following the Gaussian curve, meaning that the log normal process is a good approximation, but it's not exact for this field. We found also log law for the variance of the log dissipation. We found the scaling of the moments and the moment function which can be extracted. This approach can be also used in rainfall. For at small scales, you have high intensity localized events of rainfall, but also sometimes it's not raining, so it's you need to have some models taking into account the fact that you have the two processes. One is the fractal support, and the other one is the intensity. This, in a more recent work, I've considered this by introducing what I call the beta multifractal model. So on the left, you have a simulation of the classical beta model, which is discrete. You can see clearly the squares appearing. And I built a continuous version of this beta model on the right. And then you can also have the support with positive values with two simulations which are shown in the two panels on the right. This can be done for simulation, but also you can have a theoretical framework in order to to capture all this, and it was done in the work that I mentioned here. Going to non-stationary multifractals, in turbulence, the classical examples are velocity field and passive scalar field. And I show here typical zeta of Q function. What we see is that we have nonlinear curves indicative of multifractality. We see that the moment of order 2 are superposed. That it's what is found because they both follow the 5/3 spectra, and the moment of order 2 is corresponding to the spectrum, the Fourier spectrum. But we see also that the passive scalar case is more concave, meaning that the temperature field is more intermittent in the field of turbulence. We also studied in the 90s climate fluctuations. I think our work was among the first to consider the multifractal properties of the climate at different scales. And we considered for this Greenland ice core data, and we found from 0.4 to 40 kilo a year, and at zeta of Q, so scaling, and also the zeta of Q nonlinear, which is shown here. And the index H was slightly smaller than 1/3. This also can be done in the field of geophysics, and here it was an example of scaling invariance of crack surfaces. The originality here is to find that the value of H is close to 0.8. So it's much larger, it's larger than 1/2, and it's also much larger than what is found for the fluids. And such a result was also found in many subsequent works in this field. In finance, the main model is Bachelier model, which was proposed in 1900, which is Brownian motion. And Mandelbrot showed in the 60s, in fact, that it's not working, and you have intermittency in financial fluctuations. And in the 90s, it was shown in different works, and our work also was among the few first works about this. We showed that, in fact, you have a scaling with approximate 1/2, because the curves are around the Q/2 curve, which correspond to Brownian motion, but still you can find in some cases some non-linearity, showing that in fact you have multifractal properties of financial markets. For now, about 20 years, I work in a laboratory of oceanology. So we also applied this in ocean sciences. What is interesting in this field is to compare passive scalar and biological active quantities. One example is fluorescence, which is a proxy of phytoplankton concentration. And here you see an example of the power spectrum. At small scale, we see that fluorescence and temperature have similar slopes, showing that fluorescence is mainly a passive quantity. But at larger scales, we see a behavior which is different, which is a signature of biological activity. And also for this range of scales, there are some multifractal properties which have been compared in different works. In the field of renewable energy, this issue is also important. If you consider a wind turbine, you have the input, which is the velocity field, which is intermittent and multifractal. You have the output, which is the power produced. On the right panel, you have what is so-called the transfer function, which is giving the power produced versus the velocity of the wind. We see that the transfer function is nonlinear. But even if it's nonlinear, the output has also multifractal properties which can be characterized by scaling and the moment function. Now I mention quickly also another method that we have introduced in order to consider scaling exponents. It's based on the empirical mode decomposition. So empirical mode decomposition is a method which is really well known now and really used in many different fields in order to analyze time series. It's a time frequency method, and the algorithm is shown here, but I'm not going into the details. Simply, it's a way to decompose a signal into a sum of modes, each mode being localized in the frequency space so that it can be seen as a dyadic filter bank. And this can be associated with the Hilbert spectral analysis. This was introduced by Norden Wang. And in fact, if you consider the mode, a given mode, you can make its Hilbert transform, and you can build an analytical signal by taking a complex number, where the real part is the mode and the complex part is the Hilbert transform. Then this complex number has an amplitude and a phase. And if you make the time derivative of the phase, you have a frequency, so that it's a time frequency amplitude analysis. And we can estimate the joint probability density of the quantities of the frequency and amplitude. And the energy can be estimated by considering the square of the amplitude. And we see on the right panel application to turbulence, where you have the Fourier spectrum and the Hilbert spectrum, and they both have the 5-third slope. Our contribution in this field was to generalize this and to introduce the moment of order Q instead of order 2. And this was a way to consider intermittency in the Hilbert framework and the frequency space. And we compared this with simulations. We showed that it's a method which compared well with classical methods like structure function wavelet leaders or detrendant fluctuation analysis. But it's less influenced by periodicities in the series. I would like also to mention the use of cumulants, because what we are doing classically when we do scaling methods, first we estimate the moment at a given scale, then we display the scale in Sorry?
Could you please mute your microphone?
Okay. So
go.
I continue. So in fact, for classical scaling methods, what we do, we estimate the moment at a given scale. We display the scale invariance of the moment, and then we make a fit. We estimate a function zeta of q, and then we estimate its parameters. So for this, we need to have a perfect scaling. When your scaling is not completely perfect, what is possible is to do cumulant by doing cumulant generating function. And then at a given scale, you can extract parameters of the model, and then you change the scale and you look at how the parameters depend on the scale. So it's a way to look at intermittency without perfect scaling. So without going into the details, you have a cumulant generating function. What I have considered in fact is the log stable model, for which the development has only two terms. One is a linear term, C1Q, and the other one is C alpha Q alpha. And then you can extract these parameters. It's what we have done in the panels, in the figures on the right. We considered surf zone oceanic data, and we looked at how the parameters depend on the scale. So to finish, I mentioned large moments. Here I have taken some figures from a paper chosen more or less randomly in the literature. So it's a paper about multifractal analysis of protein sequences. What is interesting is that they look at moments going from -15 to +15. So -15 will be, if you look at a moment of order -15, you really emphasize very small values of the field. So it means, because you have a finite precision, it means you are looking at noise of it. It's not useful to go to so small moments, to large negative moments. And for positive moments of order 15, which is really a large value, you have clearly sampling limitations. So in fact, this is also linked to a question of divergence of moment of cascade. It was proposed first by Mandelbrot in 74, developed also by Sherdia and Lovejoy in 87. It's a mathematical framework. It was mainly developed by Kahn in the 70s and 80s. And you have also now, it's a well-known field in probability theory about called Gaussian multiplicative chaos. I mentioned the review paper of Robert and Vargas 2010, which discuss all this. Mainly, what is the idea is that when you develop the cascade at very small scale, you have very huge spikes. What you need to do with such a random measure, you need to average it. And the fact that sometimes you cannot average the largest fluctuation, and you are led to, in fact, to the Dress field as some divergence of moments with a critical order of moments, which is given by the equation on the right. And when you have divergence of moments, it means you have a Paolo tail of the PDF. You have many other names for this: hyperbolic law, fat tail, heavy tail, Pareto law, Frechet law. And what you find in practice when you do the data analysis, you are not getting infinite numbers, but you have a number with an estimation which will depend on the sampling. For example, in the case here, if you have only one realization, you will have a curve which will become linear for large moments. And if you increase the sampling, you're going to have different slopes like this, and the slope will increase. So you have a part which is independent of sampling and a part which increases with the sampling. Through the relationship of Kolmogorov 62 between dissipation and velocity increments, the divergence of moment of order alpha of the dissipation correspond to moment of order 3 alpha for velocity increments. And the same can be found on the right panel here in the right figure for zeta of q. You can see you have a part which will be independent of sampling and a part which will vary with the sampling, but instead of increasing, it will decrease. This is what we expect theoretically. In early work in the 90s, in fact, we analyzed data from atmosphere, and we found a value of QD for the dissipation in turbulence about 2.4 and about 7 for velocity increments. In another work a bit later, Arnedo et al. 96, here I copied a part of the introduction of this paper. Different European groups met and tried to find a consensus for the different values of the scaling exponents. And what they indicate is that the consensus was found up to moment of order 7. And after they have values which depend on the group. Of course, they did not mention divergence of moments as an explanation, but it's my understanding of the result. The fact that they have a part which is independent of sampling and a part which varies with the sampling. We can also find other works. Dr. Witt in 2004 tried to look at high order moments using atmospheric measurement, and he found that the moment of order Q equal 6 is converging, but not of order 7. There is another work by some Japanese colleagues published in 2009 by using DNS data with a very high Reynolds number, and they found QD equal 8. And finally, another work that I found, but perhaps there are other works in the literature, but it's what I found. It's also DNS data, and it's a work published in 2012. And what is found is looking at the Survivile function for epsilon, you find a slope of, it's myself that I put the red part, with a slope of 3.4. corresponding to a divergence of order 2.4 for the dissipation. So all these numbers seems to be to be compatible. And now, so I go to my conclusion. So for measures, what I showed, we are doing coarse graining. For non-stationary or multi-affine fields, we do a structure function, wavelets, EMD, or other methods. You have different multifractal models which are log IDA, and in this case, you make the fits of the analytical curves that you obtain. This has been applied to many different fields, much more that I just showed. It was only a few examples. And for the velocity, we found a divergence of moment of more or less 7 ± 1. What is still to be done, to my point of view, especially in turbulence, first Navier-Stokes equations are deterministic, and multifractal intermittencies are stochastic frameworks. The link between the two is still missing, especially from Navier-Stokes, showing that we have intermittency is, I think, an important point. I think it will be, as I understand it, more or less the topic of the talk of Charles in a few minutes. Also, when we do closure models, in fact, eddy viscosity, LES models, usually they're assuming a separation of scale, and they are not compatible with the long-range correlation, which is inside cascades and intermittency. So what would be interesting is to find a closure which is compatible with multifractals. Prediction issues are important. Also, we know how to generate continuous multiplicative cascade, but to generate a multi-affine stochastic process in a general way is still missing, and also extension to multi-dimensional case. And so I finish with advertisement for my 2 books. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois, for this nice and interesting talk. So we have time for questions. You can put in chat or raise your hand and directly make the... Yes, Sean, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Francois, for a very nice overview. I just had a comment about your QD is about 7, and the thing is that what we found, some wind tunnel analysis that we published in my book with Danielle, 2013, is that you get a value around 7 if you look at the inertial range, and you get a value of about 5 if you look at the dissipation range, and the same data. In fact, but it's actually 7.7, in fact 5.4, so the ratio is almost exactly 3/2, which is the theoretical ratio. If you had, in the inertial range, the epsilon, the energy dissipation or the energy flux in the inertial range goes as the 3rd power of the velocity differences, whereas in the dissipation range it goes as the 2nd power, in fact, in time. So anyway, and the other thing is that this really big DNS that Srinivasan and colleagues published a few years ago seems to be almost 5, actually, according to their data. But this is, I think, in the dissipation range, so it would be completely consistent with what you're saying. On the other hand, there are lots of, there's radiosonde data, aircraft data, but this is in space and not in time, and those numbers are closer to 5. So anyway, so there may be some, I think we're close to having a good understanding, in fact. But one other comment I had was about, you talk about non-stationary multifractals, and I guess I always find this a bit maybe confused. Well, I think people are confused to some extent, because the problem is that the multifractal is only defined out to an outer scale, which is finite. And so if you have, in the usual case where you have, say, a random drunkard's walk, a Brownian motion, it's not, the process is non-stationary because of the infinitely long times, the large scales. But the multifractal can be completely stationary over a finite range. So over the range over which the multifractal process is defined, it is completely translationally independent. Let's say if it's a continuous cascade. But so anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I agree. It's simply that's why I gave different names that exist in the literature about this. And it's of course when something is not stationary, it's only non-stationary over a given range of scales. It cannot be all the way not stationary. And considering the QD values, yeah, I forgot to to mention your recent book. We discussed this question, and you're right. There are other works with different values. Yeah, I saw your presentation where you briefly mentioned this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other question? I have one question, Francois. Since you are working a lot on the empirical mode decomposition, what is your feeling with respect to the fractal analysis if you compare, for example, EMD or wavelets?
You mean which one is the better?
Yeah, not so much better, but what you would recommend or for any specific application? You know, I work on the EMD a lot, but
Yeah.
do you think that really the EMD could, how to say, solve some problems related to the stationarity or overcome some other limitations?
Yeah, but it cannot be the final answer because it's mainly limited to time series, and we need also to have some approach that works also for more general fields. So, but for a time series, I think it's a good method. But in fact, in our paper, we compared different methods, and several of them gave more or less the same results because we did some simulation. So we have a given parameter, and we try to see if the method is able to recover this parameter. And EMD was a good choice, but also there was some wavelet case which also gave a good result. Only detrendant fluctuation analysis is really popular now, but in fact we don't really understand why, because we don't think there is something really interesting with this method, but it's really popular now.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I saw one raise hand. Please go ahead.
I have one question. I don't know if you listen me.
Yes.
Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm Claudia Oleshko from Mexico. Very simple question. What do you mean when you are talking about the perfect scaling? Because for me, perfect scaling means that you use different techniques with different precision for the same process, and you analyze all these different scales together by fractals or multifractals analysis, but not when you have the same data field and you choose different steps for analysis and you are speaking about the perfect scaling. I don't know if I can explain.
Yeah, what I mean, I've analyzed a lot of different data, and sometimes you have, when you look at the moment versus the scale, you are trying to have in log-log plot a straight line, and sometimes the straight line is really nice, sometimes it's not so nice, and you have and so in turbulence, for example, people have introduced something a long time ago called extended self-similarity, in order to take this into account, because the scaling was not perfect. That's what I call perfect scaling. It's only a question of line.
How many scales do you use for turbulence? How many scales? What is your range of scales?
It depends on the data that you have. If you have sometimes with really high Reynolds number, you can have 2 decades with a really nice scaling.
with different techniques.
Yeah,
You obtain your data
we do,
with different
what is
methods.
classical in the field of turbulence. What is classical, if you look at structure function, you look at the compensated. So you multiply by the value and you try to have a plateau. And this is really a way to really check that you have the good scaling, the compensated structure function. If you have a plateau, and sometimes it depends on the data, but sometimes you can have a nice plateau over 2 or 3 decades.
I'm asking because I'm working on multifractal metrology. So, for instance, in petroleum industry, in oil industry, when they open the well, they always measure the turbulence by simple equipment. They put them in the oil, and we measure the turbulence parameters. But these parameters can be compared with seismic, for instance, with seismic data, or with data of different theoretical base for measurements, no? A lot of them, including radioactive elements and all of these things. So when you apply the multifractal analysis and compare all these different techniques and come to the plateau, like you tell it, there I'm seeing the perfect scaling, but it's possible that I'm wrong, no? But for me, this is perfect scaling, no? The methods should be totally different for measuring, no? Or I'm not okay.
Yeah, I didn't see your data, but yeah, I agree. It depends on the field. But I'm interested by your the applications that you are mentioning. It seems interesting if you can.
Daniel have very clear example of my application. I sent him the PowerPoint with all my cascade data.
Okay.
Thank you. Very beautiful presentation.
Sean, do you want to add something?
Yes, I'm glad that you brought up the DFA, deep trended fluctuation analysis, because I also am surprised at its popularity, but I think I more or less understand the reason for it. The reason is that it works for this h exponent between -1 and +1, or even -1 and even a higher value than 1, depending on the order of DFA. And the problem is that if you just use differences to define fluctuations, it's only useful for h between 0 and 1. So when people are looking at all kinds of monthly and longer, say, climate series, the h's are always negative between 0 and -1. And so the DFA works quite well, but it's still not the best technique in any case. But that's the reason. And so that's why actually for fields that could be anywhere between -1 and +1 for the h, then you should use the Haar fluctuation. At least that's my opinion, which is just to take the difference of the first half of the interval minus, so the average of the first half of the interval minus the average of the second half of the interval. And then you get something easy to interpret, easy to apply, and it's a little bit better, in fact, than the DFA if you actually work it out in numerical examples and stuff. And anyway, so I think that's the thing behind the DFA.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sean.